Okay, let's continue with part 2 of the review of Silence by Shusaku Endo. The important part of the novel is questioning of the relationship between Christ and Judas through the relationship between Rodriguez and a Japanese Christian named Kichijiro. Rodriguez, through his persecution and torture, seems to be modern-day Christ, and in his thoughts he seems to be comparing himself to Christ, maybe to justify and accept the suffering he is going through, and he sees Kichijiro, who betrays him on various occasions, as a figure of Judas. But on a deeper or higher level, the story might be of one beginning as Christ and ending as Judas, referring to Rodriguez. We might all be Judases in the moment of weakness, selling ourselves, and later regretting it, even trying to make amends. And the cycle repeats itself, similar to Kichijiro's doings. The importance Judas had for Christ and his faith is that he was the real, practical test for the values preached by Christ, and ultimately it showed the universality of Christianity's embrace and acceptance. Christ did not die for the good and beautiful. It is easy enough to die for the good and beautiful. The hard thing is to die for the miserable and corrupt. Maybe our faith needs to be tested so it becomes more real and has a deeper impact on our lives. The whole idea of Judas is that he is weak, not really bad, but it shouldn't really matter for somebody who is Christian. There shouldn't be any distinction because both are seen as victims, one physically weak and the other ignorant. Rodriguez, stirred by his troublesome context with Kichijiro, wonders how Christ felt about Judas, and he realizes that Christ wanted to save him, even him. And further, he concludes that Judas was nothing more than a puppet in the Christian tragedy. Judas was a weak being, a symbol of who Christianity is supposed to protect and take care of, and the opportunity for application of the fundamental Christian idea of turning the other cheek when wronged. Maybe Judas was the ultimate test of Christianity. What does it stand for, and how can it be defined by each individual? No doubt his fellow priests would condemn his act as sacrilege, but even if he was betraying them, he was not betraying his Lord. He loved him now in a different way from before. Everything that had taken place until now had been necessary to bring him to this love. Even now I am the last priest in this land, but our Lord was not silent. Even if he had been silent, my life until this day would have spoken of him. Maybe without Judas there would be no Christ, the symbol he became. So Judas, even though he was a villain, indirectly responsible for Christ's crucifixion, was a necessary ingredient for the development of Christianity, a real-life proof of the ideas it stands for. So maybe one of the deeper messages of the novel is that what you do doesn't necessarily mean who you are, especially during personal reflections on yourself. To sum it up, Silence was a deep reading that made me think about the relativity of faith, questioning the absolute religious beliefs, also the difference between personal belief and organized religion. Christ said that every man has his own relationship with God, implying that all the symbols and intermediaries are useless, not needed for connection with God. We can conclude organized religions are more political than spiritual. Doesn't matter if it is Christianity or Buddhism. And spirituality is very personal, more influenced by the inner experience of the individual. Another question that comes from the story is, what did Christianity offer the Japanese? As everywhere, hope for better life, not here on earth, but some kind of eternal reward for their suffering. And in Japan, the suffering of the peasants was extreme. When baptizing a newborn child, Rodriguez imagines its future miserable and full of suffering, and thinks that he, the child, will live like a beast and die like a beast. Life in this world is too painful for these Japanese peasants. Only by relying on the temple of paradise have they been able to go on living. The end presented as the reward for all the sufferings during one's life has always been the strongest selling point of Christianity, dying might be seen not as the end, but rather transformation and liberation, and looking at it in this manner, that might be considered a reward, but you have to earn it by staying alive and suffering as long as possible. This relates to Plato's philosophy, which predates Christianity, about the duality of humans, being both a physical body and immaterial soul, and philosophy and theology are not that different. On the surface, one deals with reason and the other with belief, but isn't reason a form of belief? Christianity became popular early on in Japan, but the authorities saw the danger it presented to their power and made sure it failed. So, in a certain manner, silence is a story of failure, failure as victory, but also failure as failure. Seems the Japanese culture, with a very few exceptions, was too strong for Christian faith. What if Japan were to choose one lawful wife from among these four? And by these lawful wife, you mean Portugal? No, I mean our church. Father, don't you think it is better for this man called Japan to stop thinking about women from foreign countries and to be united with a woman born in the same country, a woman who has sympathy for his way of thinking? It was a pragmatic failure, but an abstract victory. We can say the Japanese, their fate seems to put to shame the fate of the Europeans. The suffering they have to go through to reaffirm their faith is brutal, and yet they stay loyal and faithful. Perhaps it has something to do with the Japanese culture, being strong, united, obedient, and disciplined. That might be the reason why the country has never been conquered or colonized. The people seem used to suffering. The book mentions how they almost constantly face hunger and also expose their body to the elements, wearing little clothes and shaving their heads even in the winter. And this makes them more capable of enduring pain and suffering. Maybe they even see it as an inseparable part of their existence, so it might be easier to accept it. The Japanese, above all, are pragmatic people. The officials didn't really care for Christianity as a belief in itself, but rather about the power the church tried to exercise over a segment of the Japanese population. And this came in direct conflict with the local power establishment. They didn't really care so much for the Japanese peasants being Christians, but for the power European priests had over them. So the peasants were sacrificed to convince the priests of the uselessness of Christianity in Japan and make them abandon the country or religion. You came to this country to lay down your life for them, but in fact they are laying down their lives for you. No, it was not for him that the peasants had been dying for so long. They had chosen death for themselves because they had faith. But this answer had no longer power to heal his wounds. The plot takes place shortly after the Shimambara Rebellion, which was a large uprising of peasants, including many Christians, against the establishment. It was brutally put down, and dozens of thousands of rebels were beheaded. The Japanese blamed Portuguese priests for incentivizing it. Also during the rebellion, the Japanese establishment was supported by the Dutch. This underlines the dispute for influence over the Japanese between competing European nations and the Catholics and Protestants. Even though the Dutch didn't care for imposing their religion on the Japanese, they, like the Japanese, were practical people and didn't clash with the local power by trying religious conversion on the natives. They just wanted to trade and make money, and that's why they replaced the Portuguese. The story of trying to introduce Christianity to Japan and the following persecution also mirrors the European Inquisition, and it might seem somewhat hypocritical when looking at it from this perspective. It is the story of general persecution of any minority group for whatever reason. It made me think about Quo Vadis, the book by Polish writer Henry Sienkiewicz, for which he won a Nobel. The story is better known from its 1950s Hollywood adaptation under the same title. It is about the brutal persecution of early Christians by the Romans during the rule of the Emperor Nero. The plot is a metaphor for the persecution the Poles suffered under Russian domination in the 19th century. How does the novel relate to the author, Shusaku Endo? It seems to reflect, maybe even as a metaphor for his own struggle with his Christian faith. Being a Catholic in Japan was not easy, especially during World War II, when the country considered itself in somewhat of a racial war against the West, its values, which included Christianity. Endo, a young man, probably had many doubts about his fate and must have wondered if the suffering was worth it, similar to Rodriguez. There are a couple adaptations of the book. There is the Japanese film from the 1970s, pretty good, but probably the best known is the 2016 film directed by Martin Scorsese. It is pretty well made and pretty faithful to the plot of the novel. It took Scorsese over 20 years of preparation to finally produce the film, but unfortunately it didn't get much recognition. It probably says more about our society than the film. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback, which I transform into a hardcover, leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tanner in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First I design the cover, and for this I use an 18th century Japanese woodblock print of a bearded, long-haired man, somewhat reminiscent of Christ or Rodriguez, reflecting in isolation and silence, hiding from his pursuers. This is the back with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So, if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze, or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.